After much deliberation, I have, with some hesitation, reached the conclusion that a constitutional amendment is necessary to clean up our campaign finance system once and for all.
This, senators, is corruption. It's not corruption in the criminal sense. I'm not talking about bribery or quid pro quo influence peddling. It is instead corruption in a sense that our framers would certainly and easily have recognized. On January 20th, 2010, the day before Citizens United was decided, our democracy was already broken. Citizens United may have shot the body, but the body was already cold. And any response to Citizens United must also respond to that more fundamental corruption. Now, how you do that will be as important as what you do. For America's cynicism about this government, whether fair or not, is too profound to imagine that this Congress alone could craft a response that would earn the confidence of the American people. Instead, this Congress needs to find a process that could discover the right reforms that itself could earn the trust of the American people. That process should not be dominated by politicians or law professors, indeed by any of the professional institutions of American government. It should be dominated instead by the people. Now, I have submitted today to this committee the outline of one such plan, what I call a series of citizen conventions, constituted as a kind of civic jury and convened to advise Congress about the best means for reform. But whether it is this process or another, your challenge is to find a process that could convince America that a corrupted institution can fix itself. The confidence of the American people in this government, in you, is at an historic low. That's not because of the number of Democrats sitting in Congress. It's not because of the number of Republicans. And it won't change simply by changing the number of Democrats or Republicans sitting in Congress. Instead, confidence is at a historic low because of a dependence that all of you and all of us have allowed to evolve in this government, one that draws you away from a dependence upon the people alone.
Professor Lessig, one of the things that I found interesting of your testimony, you didn't mention, but is written, this notion of a citizens' convention. Most of the constitutional amendments that are being proposed talk about actually changing the Constitution. You've taken a step beyond that, have you not, in terms of opening it up to a much different process to bring in a lot of new voices.
The process that I've described, the citizen conventions, would be conducted in the way that, for example, Professor Fishkin of Stanford has conducted what he calls deliberative polls. So in this procedure, we take a random selection of, let's say, 300 citizens. Imagine we run 4 of these conventions around the country, one in each region, 4 regions in the country. And these 300 citizens would act as a jury that would listen to the submissions of people about what these issues are and what the solutions are, and they would deliberate. And they would deliberate, in my view, they should be sequestered, they should be compensated, they should be protected so that they can do their work like any jury can do its work with the confidence and protection necessary. But in that process, we would involve a cross-section, a representative random cross-section of the American public. And my view is this process is necessary because as Americans look to this institution and, frankly, to people like me, law professors or lawyers who talk about this issue, their eyes glaze over because they can't believe that the institution has the capacity to change itself to deal with what is the core problem. So that's the way that bringing in another voice into this process could aid this Congress, I believe, in thinking about what response might actually earn the trust of the American people.
How you think an effective citizen convention might move us towards effective action in campaign finance reform?
Well, I think the most difficult problem here is that this is a difficult problem to solve. Unlike the 17th Amendment, which, when it changed the Senate from being appointed by state legislatures to being elected by the people, that solution was a simple one to craft. Everybody understood how to do it. The words were not in contest. What we've seen in the range of proposals here is that it's a really complicated question, and it should be carefully deliberated upon in a way that could bring people into the conversation much more effectively than, frankly, any hearing process could inside of the United States Congress. So my suggestion is, if we had a process that was open and observed by people, where ordinary people participated. And I've run mock conventions of ordinary people talking about constitutional matters. I think, to the surprise of many people, you would see that ordinary people deliberating about what the Constitution needs and how the reforms should go forward would far surpass 98% of what is commonly discussed in this particular context. And that's because, frankly, politics is the one sport where the amateur is better for the nation than the professional, because the professional is very good at figuring out what the particular interest that he or she represents needs, but the amateur can be brought to a point where he or she thinks about what the nation needs. And I think we need at least that part in this process. So if this Congress convened a series of citizen conventions, it could advise Congress. It would have no legal authority, of course, but if run in the right way, it could advise Congress in a way that could make people look at it and say, okay, if 4 of these conventions have said the following amendments make sense, and Congress then proposes those amendments, we have a reason to have some confidence that this might actually be a way to solve the problem.
Professor Lessig, I see I'm out of time. That's a very, I think, compelling proposal. It is sort of hearkening to what's at the heart of our jury system, our grand jury system, and how average citizens are empowered in our system, or should be, yes, to make fundamental decisions, both about the substance and the process of governing.
Absolutely. And that's actually, in the Montana case, the most striking thing, I think, about the Montana case was the court's decision to summarily reverse the Montana case, when the Montana Supreme Court's opinion is chock full with all the arguments necessary to see why this is a kind of corruption. This current system is a kind of corruption. But the current court is dominated by justices who believe the only corruption that's relevant is quid pro quo corruption.
Criminal corruption, to use your testimony.
That's right. But from the framers' perspective, that is outrageous. The framers of our Constitution were more concerned with the systemic, what Buddy called the institutional corruption, than they were worrying about whether there would be the Randy Duke Cunninghams or William Jeffersons inside of government. They were worried about setting up a system that would create the right incentives, the right dependencies. And what we've seen now is a corruption of that system.
They talked about that in the debates that led to the Constitution, and they used the very word corruption in those discussions, and it was sort of the opposite side of the coin of integrity of government.
Co-sponsored the Disclose Act. I think it's important to disclose it, but we all know that's not going to fix it. When you talk about your idea of citizens gathering for these basically constitutional conventions on the local level, how do you see this working with actually getting the amendment passed that it appears that we're going to have to pass to fix this?
I think that these conventions should come up with their view of what the right answer looks like, and that should come back to this Congress, and this Congress should be required to then answer the view of these conventions. Here's what we think it should be. Here's how Congress responds to that. And then hopefully the process comes to some convergence on what the right answer looks like, which Congress could then introduce as an amendment that gets sent out to the states. This is a short circuit around the way the framers thought we would bring the states and the people into this process, which is a constitutional convention or an Article 5 convention that the states call upon. A lot of people have problems with that. I have more faith in that system than most. But I think this system would at least bring citizens into the process at a time when the technology enables people to participate in a way that would be quite effective, but could produce something valuable and useful into the, for Congress to use in figuring out what the right answer looks like.
Because Citizens United itself is not the sole cause of the problems we face, but also the damage done to the court itself by these decisions. And I worry about the credibility and even legitimacy of the court. I know you've been a scholar, you've been a law clerk. Wonder if you could talk a little bit about that area and about possibly also the related area of a code of ethics that would be applied to the Supreme Court. We've talked about it here. Senator Durbin and others have raised it, and I have as well. So let me ask you that very general question.
I frankly have been surprised in the last 5 to 8 years with the carelessness the court has displayed about the need to nurture and preserve the public's confidence in that institution as being above the political fray. I think there's a willfulness that historically, not just in this court, but across other courts across the world, has led to the weakening of that kind of institution within a political system.